Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Jeremy Liew with us. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Hey, good to be here.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this one. You're a partner at Lightspeed Ventures, and just so our audience knows this, I'm going to brag on you a little bit here. For the last couple of years, you've been named to Forbes' Midas list as one of the top tech investors. And that's a very small group of investors that get named to that. And so tell us real quick to begin, what are some of the investments that you've made or that you've been responsible for that our audience might have heard of?
Sure. Yeah, Snapchat is probably one that's quite topical at this point. We led the seed investment in that. Mm-hmm. For people in college, Whisper is another app that's following a very similar growth trajectory to Snapchat, although a few months behind. On the commerce side, companies like Shoe Dazzle and The Honest Company, Bonobos, mm-hmm. And then in gaming, companies like Kixeye and Playdom, which Disney bought for about $500 million a few years ago, mm-hmm. and Flickster, the leading phone and social app for movies, which was bought by Warner Brothers a couple years ago as well.
Yeah, that's quite a portfolio. No matter who's listening, there's a few of those brands they've heard of. Let me ask you this, because here's the real question. What do you know about technology, or what thesis do you have that allows you to really tell the difference between gold and fool's gold, since you have Midas's touch?
Yeah, there's no one thing. And frankly, it's not necessarily intuition. A lot of times it's looking at the data. So for a lot of consumer apps and services and websites, if you see the retention, if you see people coming back and using a product really frequently, even if it's not really big, as long as it's growing at some level, if that user retention and that user engagement is there, then that's a pretty good predictor of success in the long term.
Yeah. Are you looking for it to grow month over month, or are you looking for a certain number for certain percentage of the users to be engaged, or are you really more concerned that it's improving? Which one kind of gets you most excited?
I think you've got to start with that engagement. If you have growth without engagement, it can be quite misleading because it can look like something's really exploding. Then as those people cycle out, it comes back down the other side of that curve, and you're not left with very much value.
Yeah.
But as long as the engagement and the retention is there, even if something is growing slowly, it will continue to build over time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about engagement in terms of Snapchat. One of the companies you mentioned earlier. One of your areas of focus is social media, and you guys invested in Snapchat, the Series C there, and it's been one of the fastest. What's that?
The seed.
Oh, the seed, sorry.
Not the seed.
Big difference there. Yeah. Big difference. And it's been one of the fastest growing startups in your portfolio there. And in a recent blog post, you write to help people get why they're growing so fast. So tell us from your perspective, what is responsible for Snapchat's growth? What are they doing? What is it about the product? Help us get it as well.
Yeah, sure. I think the funny thing about Snapchat is that most of the people who are writing about it don't use the product. And so they have these kind of preconceptions about what people would use a disappearing message or a disappearing photo for. If you actually go talk to people who use it, what they say is that everybody's living in social media these days, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and these things are creating this sort of permanent record mm-hmm. of your life. And so it's almost like you're on stage and you're performing all the time, and so you feel this responsibility to put your best face forward.
Yeah.
Like, look at me, I'm checking into a cool restaurant because I'm the kind of guy that goes to cool restaurants. Mm-hmm. Look at this picture of me with all of my attractive friends because I'm the sort of a guy who has lots of really attractive friends and has a lot of fun, or whatever it is. And so people always try to put their best face forward. And that's tiring. And it's not real. It's not the true you. And so what Snapchat really enables is for people to have these much more authentic, real conversations when they can be silly or sad or angry, as well as happy and excited and the positive emotions. Mm-hmm. But they can have that with their close friends, And so a sort of a great example use case might be, a high school girl wakes up and she's got a zit on her nose or something like that, right? She's not going to take a picture of that and put it on Instagram or on Facebook, or on Twitter. She doesn't want people to see that. But she's feeling some emotion about that right now. So she might take a selfie with Snapchat and send it to her best friend and say, "Oh my God, I'm so hideous." And then she'll get a response from that, and her friend will say, "No, honey, you're beautiful." And they're into this conversation, right? And she's got what she wanted. She was looking for that affirmation. She was looking for that kind of positive, because she was feeling ugly and she was feeling sad and she was feeling a little bit depressed in that instant. But that's not an instant she wants to have return and be permanently archived, forever and ever. And so that enables this real authenticity of communications where people can be really real with each other. And that's one example. Maybe they're just feeling silly and they're making a funny face, out in front of their school or whatever it is, just trying to get a laugh out of their friend. I mean, that's a different thing too. And so this sort of, I think it's like text messages. Like if you send a text message and someone doesn't respond, it's kind of rude. And it's the same thing with a Snapchat. If you send a snap to somebody and people don't respond, it's kind of rude. That's what that cultural norm that's developed around Snapchat is what's driving such high engagement, such high retention.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word authenticity, and one of the things your post also highlighted was how that even when you send things out to a group, it looks very individualized. You think it was just sent to you. How important do you think that is? The fact that you feel like you're really the center of attention, even when it's a group chat kind of happening.
I think that's part of it. I don't think that's the core of it. I think the core is that you can really live your life in full with your friends and not just share the happy, positive parts, because it kind of gets tiring to just always have that pressure to be on stage.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, seeing what Snapchat has done by kind of being more like the real world. Like when I speak in the real world to my friends, my wife, whoever, it's not recorded forever. And so Snapchat kind of reflects the real world in the way that I'm used to it. What do you think the next big opportunity for social is? Maybe another situation that needs to reflect the real world better, or maybe a totally different thing. Well, where do you think the potential is for the next big opportunities in social?
Yeah, Evan, the CEO and co-founder of Snapchat, has talked a lot about that, about this idea that, it's weird that the default is that things are recorded forever. That has not historically been the case. It's only been in the last few years that that's been the case, and Snapchat restores kind of the original defaults that, communications go away. They're not recorded at the time. So I think that's right. And that was one of his real, key insights. I think another interesting angle is this other company, Whisper, that I mentioned to you. Different dimension, but a few years ago, I think we all thought that Facebook was going to run the table on social, right? Everything social was going to be Facebook. Turns out that's not the case, because as Facebook has grown and grown, its brand has become more entrenched, right? Facebook is the journal of record for your life, right? And so if something is going to be ephemeral like Snapchat, then that's antithetical to what Facebook stands for. And so that's why Snapchat can grow. And when Facebook tries to launch something like Poke, it failed because it clashes with what Facebook stands for as a brand.
Yeah.
The other thing that Facebook stands for is real identity. And so what Whisper is a way that people can anonymously share some of their thoughts. Usually done over a picture, so it's a lot like the old Pop Secret. And then other people can react to that. And so the anonymity, again, is antithetical to what Facebook stands for. Yeah. And again, there are a lot of things that you might be feeling that you wouldn't want to share on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Let's say you were feeling suicidal. Put that on Facebook. Well, let's say that you were having a lot of angst about being in the closet and not having come out to your family. Well, let's just say that you were feeling bad because you had a fight with your best friend that day. Those are some examples of very real emotions that other people can identify with. They can have a shared experience around. They can be encouraging and positive about and react to. But there's no real forum for that sort of sharing in a real identity world.
Yeah.
Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. And so that's why I think we're seeing Whisper also grow in a really interesting and positive way. And I gave you obviously some of the most personal things, but it ranges from that to,
Sure.
wishing that I was 10 pounds thinner.
Yeah. All that stuff. Now, those are great examples, and it's going to be exciting to think about what the next 5 years look like, because we're going to see new things that are not like Facebook, that are antithetical to Facebook, like you said. And as soon as they come about, we're going to say, obviously, this was a need, until somebody does it. It just doesn't feel that way yet. Another area that you're really focused on is gaming. And recently, you've stated that you think the next billion-dollar games company will be built on Google Glass. So let me ask you this. When you say that you think the next billion-dollar games company will be built on Google Glass, why does it help startups instead of the incumbents like the Nintendos or the Sonys? Why won't they be the ones to just come into Google Glass and run the show? How do we even have a chance to compete?
Yeah, sure. It's funny to think, every time there's a new platform that launches that supports gaming, and I think Facebook would be one example. Mobile phones, smartphones would be another, tablets would be another. It starts off small. And it starts off, frankly, not very good for games. So the very first Facebook games were kind of crappy. Mm-hmm. The very first mobile games were kind of crappy. And so the big incumbent gaming companies, they look at these new platforms and they say, first of all, it's not big enough to pay attention to.
Okay.
So we might put a team on it, but we're not going to put our A team on it. We're going to put our A team on the thing that made us a lot of money last year. So we're going to keep on going. So firstly, they're not going to put their best team because it doesn't look very big. And secondly, because the quality that's available is so inferior to what they're used to being able to produce, they tend to dismiss it as a bit of a joke. Mm-hmm. So what that does is that clears the field for startups, because the big guys actually they don't pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And so what happens is these platforms, they obviously all start small, but if they grow to be successful, as Facebook has, as mobile has, as tablets have, then the early leaders tend to be able to grow with that platform. Mm. So even when finally the incumbents realize and start to pay attention, those startups that have been there from the beginning, they've built up all this experience on what works and what doesn't. They've built up, a distribution advantage, be able to cross-promote other new games onto the platform. That definitely creates some defensibility when the big guys come calling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if a startup's watching this and they're excited about the Google Glass opportunity and they want to get into the games with it, is the best advice you have for them is do something even if it's crappy now, because if you keep at it, it might pay off? Or is there some other bit of advice you would give them to really poise themselves where they should be to take advantage of it?
Well, I don't think just now is the right time, because there's no one using Google Glass, mm-hmm. right? And we need to wait until it actually gets released to the public, and not just sort of, the PR release plus the developer kits, mm-hmm. right? Because with all this stuff, unless you get real user feedback, you don't know if you're building something that's good or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that's great. Now, obviously you think Google Glass is going to transform, gaming to some degree. What are some other verticals? I think we all have some obvious ones in our head. I mean, we think it's going to transform social in some way, maybe gaming, like you said. Is there any other verticals that come to your mind as of, this is something that's going to be very transformed by Google Glass, possibly?
Yeah, it's not that I think that gaming is going to be transformed by Google Glass. What I'm saying is something different, which is every time you get a mass consumer platform, technology mm-hmm. platform, mm-hmm. it gets used for games.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Okay.
People love to play games, right? And so the question is do you think that Google Glass will be a mass consumer platform? I think it's got a good shot at being that. I think the price has got to come down a long way. Mm-hmm. But the trend is going to be your friend on that. So I think there's a decent chance that the price will come down, that it could become a mass consumer mm-hmm. platform. And in all these cases, they don't get driven by games. People don't buy this. People don't say, hey, I'm going to buy a pair of Google Glasses because I'm going to want to play great games on it. Mm-hmm. They say, I'm going to buy it because it's going to be great for looking things up and navigation and maps and, and taking pictures, and like it's going to be fantastic. The same way that no one says I'm going to buy a phone for games. They say I'm going to buy a phone because, think about how productive it's going to be, and like, you'll be able to surf the web while walking around. It's going to be fantastic. Or a tablet or Facebook. Facebook, no one went there for games. They said, look, it's going to keep in touch with my friends. It's messaging. It's really practical. That's the sort of what people tell themselves about these consumer platforms. But then they always end up playing games on them.
Yeah.
And so, anything that can support games that's a mass consumer platform will.
Gotcha.
Now, the only point that I'm saying about the reinvention is because it's clear that the Google Glass, you can't just port, Minesweeper or Tetris or Farmville or Angry Birds, because the game dynamics will have to be different. The UI is different. The control mechanisms and metaphors are all going to be different. So there will be a bunch of reinvention. But I'm not saying that the Google Glass drives the reinvention of games. I'm saying anything that's a consumer platform will be used for games. And once you accept that premise, then you just say, okay, well, and the games will have to be different. They'll have to be optimized.
Yeah. With everything I've heard you say so far, it seems like a theme is emerging. I'm starting to understand how you think a little better, which is you understand the user. When you talk about Snapchat, you talk about it not from the technology point of view, but from a person who wants to share something that doesn't last forever, because that's human. When you talk about Whisper, it's about needing to share something that you can't, you want to be anonymous when you share it. So you're thinking about it from the user. When you think about games, you're very realistic about how humans, do things. They buy it because it's a good tool. They use it for games. Is that one of the secrets of your success, is that you really just think about the user and you kind of cut through the hype in a sense? Would that be fair to say?
I definitely spend a lot of time thinking about users. And the one reason is that, technology changes, but users don't.
Mm-hmm.
Their motivations don't change. What they want to do doesn't change. The medium might change. The mechanisms, the specifics might change. But fundamental human behavior is relatively stable over time.
Yeah.
So if you can see a historical analog to something, then that really helps you project future user behavior. So for instance, we invested in a company called Rockyu, which is now a Facebook game publisher, but at the time the way it started out was building these kind of widgets to kind of bling out your MySpace page initially, and eventually Facebook page with these apps and widgets. And for me, the consumer parallel was, when I was in high school, a long time ago, we used to put like stickers on the inside of our lockers, and we would rip things out of magazines and stick them up, and and more the girls than the guys would do that. But like, there was a very common behavior. And then they would decorate the fronts of their folders, right, of their books and their binders that they were walking around school with. And so, what is going on there? People are trying to create a representation for what's important to them that is visible to the rest of the world. Okay, so when you take that mindset and you say, okay, well, instead of walking through the hall at school, I'm now walking through MySpace or Facebook, then what is the equivalent of that representation of what's important to me? Well, and that's how I could see, okay, so this is why we're seeing such a big growth in these, and this was 2006 timeframe, so obviously things have changed a lot. But it's that same idea of if you can see a historical parallel, then oftentimes you can start to understand what's behind the user's incentive to do something.
Yeah, no, that's a great bit of advice, to look for those analogs in history, because like you said, human nature, it's relatively stable. I totally agree. Now, you also are focused on commerce, and you've made a couple of investments in e-commerce subscription services, which were very hot, and then some of them are still doing really well. What do you think the ingredients of a great kind of e-commerce subscription service is? What are maybe the 2-3 things that just really need to be in place? Because you saw a lot of people try it over a short period of time, and they didn't all last. What do you think helps people survive in that kind of category?
E-commerce, not just subscription, but e-commerce in general, it comes down to a relatively small number of things, and frankly, most tech startup people are not very good at them. Merchandising. getting really good products that people love and knowing when the taste changes. Marketing, customer acquisition, operations, shipping things on time, knowing where they are, good customer service, like all that sort of stuff that is really about kind of managing large numbers of relatively low skilled people in the warehouse and the customer service call center. That's quite different from, guys who just are really good at writing code. And so, I think that's one of the reasons. I don't think it's about subscription. It's just that, like, in general, e-commerce calls for a different set of skills from entrepreneurs to be successful relative to many other kinds of, internet startup, spikes for skill set. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons why so many of these e-commerce startups, whether subscription or not, started outside the Bay Area. It's why you see so many in LA, you see so many in New York, Chicago, DC, places outside the Bay Area, because the tech centricity, the product, management centricity isn't there.
Yeah, no, that's great. Hearing your advice there, it just makes me think that everyone should read Tony Hsieh's book, the founder of Zappos, because in his book, he outlines everything you just said, in terms of the merchandising. That was a big part early on. They wanted more merchandise. They had to get the right stuff. He talks about his warehouses in Kentucky and how they had to manage them, how they had to fly out and deal with all that stuff. He goes through a story that is very unlike a tech startup story, but it is like an e-commerce story. And so I think people should really check out that book, because I think your advice aligns perfectly with what he had to go through to really pull that off, and then the support as well and all that stuff. Let me ask you about Bitcoin, something that's kind of new for a lot of people and kind of exciting. I know you've been writing about it a little bit, and it seems like you're getting more and more excited about it as I see you talk about it online. So if you would, give us the layman's terms description of what it is. Some people watching this, they know, some don't. You don't got to go into detail, but high level, what is Bitcoin? And then we'll talk about a little more of the details of it.
So Bitcoin is a distributed, open source digital currency. So what that means is it's a way that people can pay for things that is outside of the control of any central government, right? Unlike US dollars, unlike euros, unlike yen, it's open source and decentralized, and there is a bunch of protocols and rules that have been dictated around that, so that everybody can understand how the flow of Bitcoins will grow over time, and people use it to buy things. Yeah,
no, that's great. What makes you excited about it? Are you excited as a consumer? Are you excited as a philosopher? Are you excited as a VC? What makes you kind of gravitate toward it right now?
I'm excited as a VC. I think that there are a number of characteristics about Bitcoin that get people excited in general. One is the decentralized nature of it, which means by definition it's outside any particular nation state. Another one is that, it's anonymous, or at least pseudonymous, which means that you're using kind of a pseudonym, you're using a long kind of complicated wallet key and not your real name. And the third thing is really low transaction costs. And so in the first generation of Bitcoin users, you had three kind of groups of people who were attracted to it. You had the kind of crypto hardcore who just loved it for the technology. You had the radical libertarians who just loved the idea that no nation state could control this. They couldn't print more money, and so it was outside of the control of any given kind of country. And then you had, frankly, a bunch of criminals who were really excited about the anonymity. It's not that all anonymous transactions are made by criminals, but if you're a criminal, you would prefer your transaction to be anonymous.
Sure.
And so you saw a lot of just pretty nasty use cases, ranging from the spectrum from mildly unpleasant, like gambling, which is legal in a lot of the world, but not in the U.S., all the way through to selling illegal drugs, child pornography, like all sorts of bad stuff. And the anonymity was what was driving that. So that was the early drivers. I think that, you're going to have to move away from a lot of that stuff for Bitcoin to become mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And the real opportunity becomes zero transaction cost.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a whole bunch of examples where if you take, the cost of credit cards out of the system, you dramatically improve the efficiency. And it's not just credit cards. So, international trade, your international money remittance,
Mm-hmm.
typically very high friction, very high cost of transaction. So a lot of money is lost into the system. Microtransactions, because of the way credit cards work, with the minimum 30% fee,
Mm-hmm.
become very, very difficult, very, very expensive. Whereas with Bitcoin, like they could be 0%, 1%, 2% type transaction fees.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of different use cases, and they become much, much, much broader. International trade, money remittance, microtransactions, etc. All these become very, very interesting,
Yeah.
and very, very mainstream and widespread. But for that to happen, the governments, by definition, are going to want to start to pay attention to this.
Mm-hmm.
They can't control Bitcoin, but they can control the transfer from Bitcoin into US dollars.
Yeah.
Euro or whatever, and it's at those choke points, because we still live in a world where most transactions are done in dollars or euro or whatever. So it's at those choke points that they have the control, and so they're going to demand, and I think not unreasonably, standard anti-money laundering, know your customer, anti-terrorism type controls, which I think most of us would say that seems pretty reasonable to me. Like, it'd be good to not have money laundering, it'd be good to not have terrorists getting lots of money transferred to them. That is a bit of a repudiation from where Bitcoin came from, which was total anonymity and total pseudonymity, towards something saying, hey, I'm going to follow the same set of regulations if I want to send Bitcoin, if I want to send dollars overseas. That you need to know who I am, so that if in fact I am funding a terrorist, you can come find me and arrest me and put me in jail, which you should.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people would agree that that's actually a reasonable perspective to take. And frankly, for Bitcoin to get really mainstream, that's going to have to become accepted by the community, and it's starting to become accepted by the community.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. We talked about Google Glass and, how the incumbents won't pay attention, and it's going to allow startups to kind of come in and fill that void, the innovator's dilemma sort of stuff. Do you think the same thing will happen with Bitcoin, or is it a different situation? Because I can imagine Visa being the one that really benefits. They'll find a way. I find it hard to imagine startups taking advantage of a Bitcoin economy and the growth of it, but maybe I'm not being creative enough in my mind. What do you think? Do the incumbents win, or do startups have a chance here?
I think this is a classic innovator's dilemma. If you're a Visa and you want to protect your 2.5% VIG on all transactions,
Mm-hmm.
and if Bitcoin comes along as the technology says, well, hang on a second, how about we just make it free?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
you can't compete.
You're kind of incented to try to protect your current business, because if you rush headlong into this future, you destroy your business.
Mm. So you think there'll be a lot of opportunity for startups. Do you think there'll be an economy kind of around Bitcoin, a service economy, or some other kind of thing where there's going to be all these startups that do different things for Bitcoin and with Bitcoin that's really going to allow a lot of these flowers to bloom?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the ecosystem, is still emerging, and there's a lot of activity in the exchanges that help you get from dollars into Bitcoin or euros into Bitcoin or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of activity in the wallets, right, where you store your Bitcoin. And then there's a lot of activity in the merchant services, so that, if you're running a small business and you want to take Bitcoin, how do you enable that? And those are some of the areas, and there's a whole bunch of other areas as well, but this whole ecosystem around Bitcoin is really developing quickly.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for your insights on that. You're one of the veterans of the VC industry, because you've been doing it for, 6 years now? Is that right?
I'm no veteran. I joined Lightspeed in 2006, but a lot of people have been in this business for a lot longer than I have.
Yeah, well, you've seen 7 years. That's something.
John Doerr said training a venture capitalist is like training a jet fighter pilot.
Okay.
it takes about 10 years, and you got to crash $50 million into the ground.
Yeah.
So on that metric, I'm still in my training wheels, period.
All right. Well, I think you've seen a lot. You're humble, so you're going to say you have a lot further to go. But I think that's part of why you're good at what you do is because you are that humble. When I talked earlier about you being on Forbes, you don't even smile. You really don't. You don't even seem like you care. I think that's one of the things that draw people to you. Quite honestly, it is your humility. But I was looking online, getting ready for this interview. And I noticed blog posts you were writing years ago about things like cohort analysis and other kind of mathematical models to look at the numbers through. I know you have a background in math, but it kind of struck me because it's becoming very popular now to talk about cohort analysis, right? It's becoming very popular now to talk about retention over the vanity metrics. 3 years ago, it wasn't popular. 4 years ago, it wasn't popular, but you were doing it then. So here's what I'm interested in. What are you doing now that's not popular that you're actually using to decide if you think a startup has any potential? Are there any mathematical models that you're using that'll be really popular in a couple years on Twitter? Is there any kind of analysis, any sort of red flag you look for? Because I do think you're a few years ahead of the industry, specifically in terms of mathematical kind of indicators. So what do you do right now that matters?
Yeah, there's nothing special, to be telling you the truth. I think, I certainly don't think it's about mathematical modeling. I think it's about understanding the consumer, taking a consumer level view. And then, frankly, one of the things I'm really interested in right now is thinking about how startups are building a brand that means something. Take, for example, The Honest Company. It's a company that we invested in. It makes non-toxic, chemical-free baby products and cleaning products. That's a company that was co-founded by Jessica Alba, the actress. And she has really been a tremendous thought leader in this category well before she started the company, testifying in Congress about the negative effects of a bunch of different chemicals on children's development, for instance. So she had this real authenticity around this passion of hers. And so when she started the company, she was able to transfer that authenticity to The Honest Company. And so that's what's helped create a real brand about The Honest Company, in the same way that, organic food, which felt very kind of fringe, 15 years ago, and today you can get it at Costco, you can get it in Walmart, it becomes very mainstream. And so that sort of idea of like creating the brand leadership around a new area has a lot of value that accretes to it, because as that leader, having that brand identity, frankly, life is easier. You get people drawn to you. And so that's an area that I've been thinking a lot about. How do you create brand that creates value? And that works in different ways in different industries. So Snapchat clearly has a brand around it. The Honest Company, Bonobos, a menswear retailer that we invest in, has a real brand around it. Shoe Dazzle, has really developed a brand identity around it. Other companies, it's harder. So, for instance, Kixeye, an extremely successful gaming company, doesn't have brand around the company necessarily, because it's hard to build brand around a publisher. It has a ton of brand around the games. So in the same way, EA doesn't have a ton of brand value around EA, but around Call of Duty and Madden. That's where the brand identity is. So where does the brand identity and the brand value accrue to, and how can you really kind of amplify and magnify that? That's an area that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about.
Well, what have you kind of come up with thinking about it? Because people watching this, they're thinking, okay, brand is a part of the answer. What are some of the things that build brand? Because you say Snapchat is a brand, and yet you said most people writing about it have no idea what it is. It's like, I look at it and it's like an icon of a ghost. The brand doesn't appeal to me, but I'm not the audience using it. You know what I mean? And so brand is tricky because the things you like, most of the world hates. The things you hate, most of the world likes. I mean, it's hard to get brand right. What have you learned about it?
So there's no magical answer here, but understanding that something that you want to seek, where it doesn't matter how many people hate it. It doesn't even matter how many people are ambivalent. What matters is how many people love it. I'm reminded there's are you familiar with Threadless?
Yeah, the t-shirt company.
The t-shirt company,
I love
yes,
it.
they make great products. We're not investors, but I definitely admire them. So they do this crowdsourced design thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this perception that like people vote on it and like they just like find the things that have the highest votes, right? The highest average rating, and they make those. It's not actually true.
Mm-hmm.
If you had one T-shirt that had 100 people voting a 3 on it, and then you had another one where you had 40 people voting 5 and 60 people voting 1, which T-shirt should you make?
The one that has the polarization, because somebody loves it and somebody hates it.
You want people to love it. It doesn't matter who hates it. They're never going to buy the T-shirt.
That's such a great insight.
And so it's this idea of like focusing on who loves your product. and that can be done, again, at any different level, at the product level, at the brand level, at the company level, at the SKU level, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you got to look for that love. People love your product then.
No, that's so good. I mean, going back to Snapchat, it's like, to me, I'm ambivalent. I don't care. I might someday, but right now it's not a part of my workflow. It's not a part of my life. And yet the people that love it, they could care less that I don't. And they're going to be as rabid about it tomorrow as they were yesterday, and it's central to who they are. So really the goal is looking for products and looking for ideas and brands that just have a rabid fan base, even if it's small, because you can work with that. So, yeah, I think it's great.
It can be small today, but it has to have the opportunity to have mass appeal.
Gotcha. And mass not meaning everybody, but meaning substantial enough to be a real business that matters to a VC. Yeah. You can still have a lot of haters and still have a VC business. So, yeah, no, it's great. Well, let me ask you this. A couple last questions here, and then we'll wrap this thing up. This whole program is about growth, and that's why I've asked you about the growth of Snapchat. I asked about Google Glass. I asked about things that, tell us where growth is going to be in the future and maybe how to grow in some respects. What mistakes do you see startups make in terms of growth? Because you see startups and you see them trying to grow and you see their misguided thinking and you see when they do it right. Are there any common mistakes that you see time and again?
One is the classic leaky bucket problem. Growth, oftentimes people define that as the number of new users.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you've got a bucket that leaks and you pour a bunch of water in the top, then it looks like there's a lot of water in the bucket. Mm-hmm. But that water trickles out through the hole. And if you can keep pouring water in for a long time, it can look like there's a lot of water in the bucket. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you stop pouring more water in the top, that thing's going to run down until it's empty.
Yeah.
And so, making sure that you've got a product that people that people love and are using and retaining and engaged with, and not just a leaky bucket. I think that's one of the biggest problems that people do, and that's usually a function of focusing on growth too early, before the product is right.
Yeah, so focus on retention early, growth once the holes in the bucket are kind of filled. You're no less than the fourth or fifth person to give us that exact same advice.
Because it's so obvious.
Yeah, it's obvious, but it's missed. I mean, that's why it keeps being repeated, because it's so easy to focus on the vanity metrics of customer acquisition and not the real metrics of customer retention, because you can always buy traffic. You can't buy retention. There's no ad platform that buys you retention, but you can go to Google Ads and you can buy new traffic, right? And the retention is the only thing that you can do in your startup that only you can do. So I think it's awesome advice, and I don't think we can hear it too much, to be quite honest. Jeremy, this has been an awesome interview. I got one last question for you. Kind of high level. You can take it anywhere you want. What's the best advice that you can give to anyone that's trying to grow their startup?
That's pretty open-ended.
It's very open-ended.
I think it's really understand your user, and understand their motivations, and understand what's going to cause them to want to use your product. If you have that really finely tuned, then you're much better positioned for both retention and acquisition. So, an example would be like I funded RockU, or whatever, 2006. And the founder was this 40-year-old guy, PhD in electrical engineering, really smart, really talented, terrific background in a bunch of different startups. But he was building products for 16-year-old girls. So he subscribed to Teen Cosmo and Glamour and 17 magazine, and he read them. He read them. Because that was how he was going to understand what was important to his audience. It can feel very unnatural. Because oftentimes you're not building products for yourself. A lot of people building e-commerce are not building products for themselves. And most of my investing is not for myself. Like the target markets for Snapchat or ShoeDazzle or Zest Finance is not me. You've got to try to figure out how you can think like your customers.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know with all the investments you do and all the things you have going on that your advice is sought after often. So we really do appreciate you taking a few moments for us here.
Good luck with it. Be well.